What's behind these vicious attacks on William and Harry? Has the siege of Royal Lodge been settled? What is the king like behind closed doors? And what was the very sweet moment between Catherine and Sophie this week? We've got another packed show for you today. Hello and welcome to Palace Confidential. I'm Jess King, standing in for Joe Elvind, and on the panel today is the Daily Mail's royal editor, Rebecca English, the Mail columnist and royal biographer, Robert Hardman, and the paper's diary editor, Richard Eden. Welcome to you all. If you haven't watched Richard Eden's fascinating episode of Reading the Royals on the fall and rise of Edward and Sophie, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, do stick around until the end of the show. It will be up next. As always, a reminder to subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals channel so you are updated every time we put out a new episode of Palace Confidential or Reading the Royals, or when we speak to Robert about his new book on King Charles. Much more on that later. But first, this show is going out on the King's birthday. Charles is 76. A very happy birthday to His Majesty from all of us here on Palace Confidential. And Rebecca, welcome back to the show. The reason that you haven't been with us is that you have been globetrotting with the King. Tell us, how has it been, and have you seen a change in him?
It's really good to be back. I missed you all. I was in Australia and Samoa with him, which feels like a lifetime ago because I subsequently went to South Africa with William. But yeah, obviously it was a very challenging trip for him because he had to pause his cancer treatment to go. It was 30,000 miles, over 11 days. And he did brilliantly. He was doing up to 10 engagements a day. I wrote in the Mail that there was a couple of times I really felt for him. He looked very tired. I remember being in Canberra with him and he was unveiling the Great Australian Seal, and he kind of sat down and he closed his eyes, and just for that split second he looked really tired and really human, and actually for the first time really like his mother. It was a real kind of sense of deja vu. But then, seconds later he was back in the room and back on duty. And I could just see that obviously just the jet lag and the trip was taking its toll. But, I don't want to kind of spark alarm because I was covering an event with him at Buckingham Palace yesterday for the British film and TV industry. And I tell you now, he was on cracking form. He was absolutely fantastic, laughing, joking, shaking hundreds of hands. He was kind of definitely on good form yesterday.
And a trip like that, tiring for anyone, I would imagine. And we hear that you had an invitation from the palace today, which you turned down to be on this palace. So tell us, what is going on there?
Well, as you say, it's the King's 76th birthday, and he's actually in Deptford in London unveiling the first coronation food hub, which was a kind of scheme to repurpose surplus food that would otherwise go to waste. He launched it on his 75th birthday last year, and he was unveiling the first successful food hub today. And I should have been down there, but I couldn't resist coming back in with you guys.
We miss you too much. We miss you too much. And Robert, you were also at the palace yesterday. Birthdays can be a very reflective time. How do you think the King will be looking back on the past year?
Well, no, I was there, with him yesterday, and he was on fine form, thoroughly enjoying it. Lots of people were wishing him a happy birthday, and he was, he was sort of brushing it off. When you're a monarch, you're the only person in the world who has two birthdays, of course. You have your official one, always on the second Saturday in June when the weather's nice and you have a parade, and then the real one. The upside of it is the 1 or the 2 days of the year when the private secretary doesn't send you a red box. You get a day off your state papers. That's part of the deal. And actually for the staff, I don't know whether they still do, but in the old days, certainly, the Queen always used to say that on her birthday, both official and private, it's the one day that every member of staff gets a glass of wine with their lunch in the palace canteen. So maybe that's what's happening today.
Very civilised. I like it. And Richard, there's a piece in the Mail online that suggests actually the King is a lot warmer and quite a lot more touchy-feely than people might think, or perhaps that Harry might let us believe in his book Spare.
Yeah, this is a really interesting piece because anyone who has read Spare will know that King Charles is portrayed as a very distant figure, someone who struggles to show his emotions. I think there's a line in the book that the older generation of royals have no way of sort of expressing their emotions. But when you actually look at how he behaves now, and I think to some extent always has, that's what this piece highlights, that yes, he is quite touchy-feely, there's quite a lot of hugging, there's, emotions are expressed quite freely. And yes, there's been a bit of a change, but I think the point is, to a certain extent, he's always been like that. But I think it's a reflection of how that book was particularly keen to kind of push one side of things, one particular agenda.
He really has. He's always been a great one for hugging. As I say in my book, the first thing he did as king, when he came down on the day after the Queen's death, and he came down to Buckingham Palace and he stopped the car outside the palace gates, went straight into the crowds, because he loves crowds. And the first woman he went up to was in floods of tears, and he sort of put out his hand and she said, "I don't want a handshake, I want a hug." And he went, "Of course," and he hugged her. So the very first act, if you like, as king was to hug someone. So I'm afraid if Harry's saying he's aloof, I would disagree.
I agree, yeah.
And Rebecca, let's move to Camilla. She has always been his strength and stay, but she has been a bit under the weather herself. How's she doing?
She's better. I mean, I spoke to her at the palace yesterday because I knew when she pulled out of Remembrance weekend that she must have been pretty poorly, because she's the daughter of a twice decorated war hero, and it's really important to her. She takes her military duties very seriously. And I said, "You must have been feeling awful." And she said, "Yeah, I was feeling really rotten." And also she was very conscious, having had a chest infection and would be around people who could be elderly. She didn't want to pass it on. But she said to me yesterday, she was coughing still a bit. She had a glass of water with her most of the time. But she was definitely on the mend. But she had to pull out of things like the premiere of Gladiator 2 this week, because she said to me, "I'll just be coughing like throughout it and really annoying everyone." So, I think by next week we'll see her back in fine form.
Good. And Robert, we know that Camilla is always encouraging Charles to look after himself, and presumably, do you think he'd be saying the same to her?
Yeah, I think they look after each other. I mean, he would have been very conscious that she wanted to be at the cenotaph, but they're both very good at telling each other to follow doctor's orders, and she's been telling him to do that all year. So I think it's every now and then he's going to say, "Right, it's your turn to put your feet up."
What sauce for the goose is
Richard, of course we want to see them as much as possible, but we don't want to run them into the ground. And as we sort of discussed last week, they are getting a bit thin on the ground.
Yes, with the King 76 and Queen Camilla 77, they are of an age and they have to take things slowly. But then again, I do wonder if the election of President Trump's given them a bit of a lift, because how old's Trump? He's 78, isn't he? And he's about to embark on this big new job at his age. So it's not just the King and Queen who, are sort of having the busiest time of their life, towards in their later years. So. Hopefully Trump will give them a bit of a boost.
We were talking about Trump. Rebecca, you've written in the past about how perhaps this presidency, how will it sort of play out? Do you think we could see a bit of a closer relationship? Do you think it will have an impact in any way, Trump being president?
Well, I wrote a piece exclusive for the Mail on Saturday about this, because I was speaking to people within Whitehall and diplomacy who were saying to me they see the royal family as their secret weapon when it comes to the new American president, that he has got a genuine admiration for the royal family, and they've already struck up a very warm relationship. They've met them several times. President Trump made no secret of his admiration for the Queen, but he also developed a really good relationship with our new king as well. In fact, someone told me that they've corresponded right up until the present day, both himself and Melania, with the King and the Queen. So they see it as a very powerful tool in their armoury, not least because a lot of the ministers we've got in the new Labour government have been quite disparaging about President Trump. So they see this as a good way to make up lost ground.
Yeah, but do you think the King would welcome a trip from Trump?
Oh yeah, I mean, when you've got the most powerful man in the world, I mean, every nation on the planet would wants a visit, or either a visit from or a visit to the President of the US. I mean, the fact that the King wrote to him after that assassination attempt, I think that was very warmly received. But let's remember, I mean, Trump came over here not long after his first time he was president, and the British government were very keen to get him. And I am told, and I heard this firsthand from a former foreign secretary, that Trump said, I'll come, but I'm only coming if I can see the Queen. So he had tea with the Queen and he came.
Fantastic. And they had a very, he was very fond of her, clearly.
Was very fond, yeah. Both had Scottish mothers. In fact, their first time they met over tea at Windsor, and it ran over time. It ran for twice as long as the allotted time, because I heard that they both had Scottish mothers, and they both owned quite large amounts of Scotland. So there was quite a lot of Scottish talk.
I'm sure. Rebecca, let's move on to Prince William now. He is in Northern Ireland. What's he doing there?
Yeah, we can't announce it before today because there's quite a strict security around visits to Northern Ireland. But this was the visit he had hoped to do in the spring, but he had to postpone because of the general election in the UK. So he's in Belfast. He is visiting homelessness projects connected with his Homewards initiative, and then he's going on to highlight the amazing creative industry that exists in Northern Ireland. It's a big pull as far for filming it is, as far as their economy is concerned. So it's a visit to publicise that, and obviously it'll be the first time we've seen him since he returned, in public, since he returned back from South Africa. He's done an investiture this week, but it's his first public engagement.
The big question for me is, will he sit on that throne? Because Game of Thrones is filmed partly in Northern Ireland.
He's not quite the King of Thrones yet.
No, I hate to break, he's not going to that set. He's going to University of Ulster, but I can imagine there'll be a lot of Game of Thrones talk. So
keep him away from the Titanic.
Definitely. Robert, for our international audience, Northern Ireland and royal visits can be a bit of a thorny issue. Just explain that for us.
Well, it is, certainly during what they call the Troubles, the period of a lot of violence and terrorism during the 70s, 80s, 90s in particular. It was a very dangerous territory for the royal family to go to the point that during the late Queen's Silver Jubilee, her 25th anniversary year, she was determined to visit all bits of the kingdom, and they said, well, you can't go to Northern Ireland, it's too dangerous, we can't let you in a car, you can only go there if you go by helicopter. And she'd always hated helicopters, she'd never been in a helicopter. That was the first time she went in one, because she felt, well, I've got to go to Northern Ireland, if it's helicopter I'll get in one. So that was her first trip because of the dangers. And but they always make a point of, it's part of the United Kingdom, and there are people there who want to see them, they will go.
Richard, a word now on Princess Catherine. I think a lot of people were very pleased to see her at the Cenotaph at the weekend.
They really were. The Remembrance weekend has sort of been a target for Catherine. Way back in kind of spring and summer, she was hoping that by that stage she would be well enough to resume public duties. So obviously we've seen her at a handful of engagements recently, but this is the first time she's carried out engagements on consecutive days, the Festival of Remembrance and then at the Cenotaph in Whitehall. So I think, as we've mentioned many times, it's a key date in the royal calendar, and she was able to fulfil it, and I'm sure that she was delighted really to be back there. Absolutely.
And Rebecca, this came after Prince William gave quite a revealing interview about his wife.
Yeah, so he agreed to speak to us journalists who travel out to South Africa, and it was an obvious question to ask him, how have you been this year? Because we've heard a lot from Catherine herself and other members of the royal family, but he's a kind of a husband and a father who's juggling to keep things together in really difficult circumstances. And actually he really openly admitted that it had been a brutal year and probably the worst of his life. I thought it was a really honest answer to a kind of an honest question, and he, unusually for him, he made no bones about it. But the one thing I would say that was a real joy about being in South Africa with him is how much better he seemed. He just seemed to me to be in a much better place, and I think he wouldn't have gone out to South Africa if he hadn't been happy with the way Catherine's recovery is going. And he just seemed really animated and quite happy, and that gave me a lot of journalists out there a lot of comfort that they're really coming out the other side of this very kind of deep, dark time for them.
Yeah, much lighter now. Very good to see. And there was a touching moment between Catherine and Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh. We can see a clip of that now. Well, the Mail Online spoke to a lip reader who said that Catherine looked out at the crowd and told Sophie, "You're never quite ready for this." And Sophie then offered some encouraging words. Robert, you were at the Cenotaph on Sunday. What are your impressions of that friendship?
Well, it's an incredibly powerful, poignant moment, and I was there. You sort of see the royals arrive, you see them take up their positions in the case of the Princess and Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, they go out onto their balcony to watch it and wait for the rest of the family to sort of parade out and line up in front of the cenotaph, and it's rather like the rest of the crowd. Before it begins, there is sort of chit chat, and the two of them were chatting away quite animatedly, just like all the veterans in the crowd. It's a sort of catch up moment. People look around and go, "Gosh, look at that! Isn't it amazing?" I mean, the whole thing looks absolutely fabulous. And then, of course, as soon as it starts, everybody sort of stands to attention, and it is a very powerful moment. It really is. And you look as right down Whitehall as they can. You just see as far as the eye can see old soldiers, male and female, some of whom going back to the Second World War, and you just think, golly, I'm very lucky to be here.
It's extremely emotional to watch it on TV, let alone being there. And Richard, there was a hand gesture from Sophie which you've picked up on in reading the Royals. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, well, this seems to be a gesture that is one of her own, Sophie. So if you go back to the Trooping the Colour early this year, it was the first time that Catherine had returned to public engagements. It was a big day, and as they left the balcony afterwards at Buckingham Palace, Sophie sort of put a gentle hand on William's back, and it was a sort of reassuring sign that, well done, you've got through that, it's been a hard day. And we saw that again at the cenotaph, where she put her hand on Catherine's back. And I think it's that sort of sign of solidarity, really, but that, I think, kind of typifies Sophie and her caring attitude.
I think it also it's showing very much the Duchess of Edinburgh sort of showing, look, you're ahead of me. You go first. It's a sort of, I know the correct order of things, which is the royals move in and out of rooms according to seniority, and I think in a way it's saying, of course you go first. You're the heir to the throne.
Well, do stick around to the end of this show. We will have the latest episode to play you next. Rebecca, we also had some very welcome news about Catherine's Carol concert, and I do believe they put a little teaser out on Instagram.
They did, yes, showing the invitations for the Together at Christmas Carol service, which I think I wrote a piece earlier on the year predicting that this was going to be the big thing for her, aside from Remembrance. This was the one thing she wanted to make sure she could be very involved with and physically be present at. And Kensington Palace have announced it will happen on December the 6th. And I think what's interesting is someone told me she thinks very carefully about the theme for every year. It's reflected post-COVID, the loss of Queen Elizabeth. And this year the theme is very much about the support networks in your life at the most difficult times. And I asked the question, is she referring to herself? And they said, yes, inevitably she is. But also she wants to highlight other people, as she has done in all her messages this year, that are either going through difficult times or have been through difficult times, and just the importance of family and community. I asked whether children were going to attend. That's never confirmed until the day, because of course kids can pick up coughs, colds and tummy bugs, especially at this time of year. But I think we'll see them there as a family, and it'll be a really uplifting note, I think, to end what has been a really difficult year for them all.
Absolutely, I think it'll be extremely festive. But Richard, getting back to William, he's come under a bit of fierce criticism this week from the journalist Tina Brown. What did she say, and what do you make of her comments?
Yes, Tina Brown's never one to be shy with her words, and these were particularly vicious, I must say. And if William has read them, which he almost certainly will have done, he will be hurt by them, I would have thought. And she really didn't like the kind of brief interview that Prince William gave to journalists on that South Africa tour, where he sort of talked about how he planned to do things a bit differently from his father. There was a suggestion of he was listing what he'll do with philanthropy, and he said, there'll be sort of empathy in there and stuff. And she was making the point, well, this is what King Charles has been doing for the past 50 years. So that sort of annoyed her. And then she also said, even more controversially, that what Prince William lacks is someone to bring him down a peg or two. She said that he really misses Prince Harry, who she thinks was always very good at bringing him down to earth, maybe being a bit rude or whatever, and that she thinks now he's just surrounded by sycophants. So, an interesting point, but I have to say I really strongly disagree with her. I think it's ridiculous. This idea that what Prince William needs is his brother back. I think that's the last thing William needs is Harry back. So I really disagree with her strongly.
Well, Rebecca, those with long memories might remember the King when he was Prince of Wales came in for a lot of criticism on how he did this. I mean, do you think these are sort of vicious attacks, or do you think this has been something that we've seen before?
I think it shows it's pretty cyclical, doesn't it? I mean, I was thinking about this, and when King Charles, when he was Prince of Wales in 1976, he started the Prince's Trust. He had criticism heaped on him that, he used his naval pension to start it, and people were saying, this is not what the royal family should be doing, this is going to infringe on government policy, you're overextending your reach, get back in your box. Now, the Prince's Trust, which is now called the King's Trust, is arguably one of the greatest facilitators for young people in this country, and is effectively considered a national institution. So I think while the royal family shouldn't bat away all criticism, I think they'll take it with a pinch of salt it probably deserves, and William will carry on doing what he's doing. As he said, I understand there'll be critics of my homelessness project, but what do you expect me to do? Sit there twiddling my thumbs? If someone like me can't use my position to try and facilitate change, then what's the point?
Mm-hmm. And Robert, in your role as a royal biographer, you've been behind the scenes at the palace in different eras. What sort of people do you think William should be surrounding himself with to get the best advice?
Well, there is a very clear difference between the sort of advisors you get when you're the monarch and when you're not the monarch. And so, as Rebecca says, when the Prince of Wales was Prince of Wales, when the King was Prince of Wales, he did get some, people trying to get close to him, sort of get his ear, suggest he did things which were sort of pushing boundaries a bit. Once you're monarch, you are constitutionally bound to listen to the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary. I mean, all these people will give you briefings, and you are, as it were, you're better advised, but you're more closely monitored. And we've seen this with Prince William. I mean, on the whole, I think he is well advised. He does listen, but occasionally makes mistakes, as I say in the book. I mean, he made an intervention on Gaza, which was not in line with government policy, and he didn't clear it with the Foreign Office. It didn't turn into anything too serious, but nonetheless, it was noted, and that's something he's got to watch. You've got to choose the right advisors, and sometimes they will tell you things you don't want to hear. Those are the important things you need to hear and listen to.
Do we know, does he have one key person that is his sort of main go-to for advice, or are there many people in his circle?
Well, every member of the royal family has a private secretary. It's kind of effectively their chief advisor, chief of staff, and that is the person that they would see as their kind of go-to sounding board. And they have deputy private secretaries, assistant private secretaries, and as Robert rightly says, as Prince of Wales, you can, as William's got through his Royal Foundation, bring in advisors on specific issues that you're interested in. Interestingly, one thing someone said to me about the King when he was Prince of Wales is that he could push the envelope a bit, but he always knew in the back of his mind that things would change when he became king. But they said the one thing is he's got an acknowledgement. He pays people to give him advice, and he should probably listen to it. And he did. He did listen to the people around him. And I think that's important, because these are people who have one foot in the outside world and can probably give you some pointers you'll need to hear.
Well, we've had lots of fascinating comments from our viewers. Let's hear some from last week's programme. Mary says, Prince William looks like George V. Let's have a look at them side by side. Do you agree with Mary? Have a think. Let us know what you think in the comments below. A question from Marjorie Clinton, who describes herself as a fan from Oregon in the USA. She asked, perhaps you've shared this before, but what is the significance of the badges you have been wearing lately? Richard, I think Marjorie means the poppies. Can you tell her about the poppies?
Yes, we were all wearing poppies on this programme last week because it was ahead of Remembrance weekend, and the poppy has been a symbol of remembrance since the First World War, because where it comes from was after the devastation in the fields of Flanders, miraculously poppies grew immediately afterwards, and there was fields full of them. That was a beautiful sight in scenes of absolute horror. So since then they've been adopted as a a symbol of remembrance and solidarity with the troops.
And it was an American who came up with the idea, actually. Mona Michael, she came up with the idea of the poppy as a symbol and started the idea of selling them. And it's been a very successful and very powerful emblem ever since.
And they make a lot of money for
They make
veterans.
millions every year for veterans organisations in whichever country they're sold in, yeah.
I hope that answered your question, Marjorie. Last week we interviewed Robert to coincide with his new book. This week we've put out an extended version of that interview on the channel. Here's one of the comments from that. Jacqueline Wilson says, the Duke of York should become a gardener and earn his keep. He needs to do something useful and show some humble civility. Sue Voss wrote, I've always liked Catherine, the Princess of Wales, but after this last year, she has gone up even more in my estimation. The way she's maintained her grace and dignity in the face of all the false claims, lies, and outright cruel nastiness that have been spread about her by the media, celebrities, and the internet has just shown what a really decent person she is inside and out. Max asks, when you talk about Queen Elizabeth's diary being released, are you talking about her personal diary? Robert, tell us the difference between diaries, because that's quite important.
Yes, as I say in the book, I was actually lucky enough to find out that the very last entry in the journal that Elizabeth II kept throughout her reign, she absolutely dutifully every day would write down, it's normally about half a page in her own hand, of the events of the day and what had happened. So it's not a sort of diary in terms of sort of 11 o'clock, trip to the dentist, 12 o'clock this. I mean, it would actually go through the day, who she'd seen. We have no idea what sort of things are in there. We won't know until they appoint an official biographer, who will then have access to all those papers, all her papers, her letters. That's what normally happens when there's a change of reign. The new monarch appoints an official biographer, and they do have access to all this stuff. So only then will we know really what she said about who knows what, but we know that she kept this diary. The reason they do this is because you've got to, as monarch, you've got to be able to look back and say, no, actually, this is what I said at the time, this is what I did at the time. Because sometimes, there will be arguments, disputes about things that happened.
Recollections may vary.
Recollections may vary, and just to ensure that recollections don't vary, you want to put them down on paper. So, it will be absolutely fascinating to see the diaries of Elizabeth II, longest reigning, longest living monarch in our history. I mean, what she saw, I'd love to know what she thought.
Well, do go back and watch that interview if you missed it. A reminder that Robert Hardman's updated biography of our new sovereign is called Charles III, New King, New Court, The Inside Story, and it is out now. There we go. Well, thank you so much for all the comments and questions. We love reading and answering them. Well, let's get back to our royal discussions now. And Rebecca, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex were also commemorating Remembrance Sunday. What did they do?
They popped up in a video over the weekend from California. And obviously Harry doesn't have any official military affiliations with his country anymore, but he was a veteran who served two tours of duty in Afghanistan, and he still supports obviously veterans through the Victor's Games and Scotty's Little Soldiers, a charity which helps children who've lost parents who are in the forces. So, he's perfectly entitled to say something if he wants, and people are perfectly entitled to either listen to it or ignore it, really.
And Richard, a lot was written about the fact them being together was quite significant. What did you make of that?
Yes, that has become a rarity these days. There's been more and more sense of them sort of leading separate lives in the sense of their careers, where they've been carrying out separate engagements. So there did seem to me something about this, that they were very much together. It seemed to be they'd given quite a lot of thought to it. There were lots of sort of little gestures, and I think it's fair to say that it was a conscious effort to say we're very much still together as a couple.
Did you notice the poppies as well, that he was wearing a British poppy and she was wearing the kind of American style poppy? I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
Nice. Well, let's move on now to Prince Andrew, and a question from one viewer. This is from Cooks and Girl, who writes about the future of his home royal lodge. She says, American here, but from a PR standpoint, what senior royal can occupy it in the future? Maybe far down the road when it's not associated with Andrew, but William and his kids won't want to occupy it. Rebecca, we'll get into this, but can you answer that?
I wouldn't be surprised if we see Beatrice or Eugenie living it in one day, personally. I mean, look, obviously various people have occupied it over the years before Andrew. Obviously, most famously, it was the late Queen Mother. And it's a big property, and the issue, as it always has been with kind of renting it out commercially, which has been often talked about, is its location in Windsor and various security issues. So I think while the King clearly would like, or the Crown Estate would like, the money that comes from a commercial rental, they've got to think quite carefully about who that they could allow that to go to. So in some ways it is easier to have a member of the royal family there, admittedly probably not paying quite such an advantageous rent that the King would like, being a family member.
And Robert, lots of news outlets were keen to follow up on your story, the revelations about the King cutting off Andrew financially to try and encourage him to leave Royal Lodge. The Duke seems to have struck a deal to stay there, but lots of people are asking questions about where the money comes from.
Yeah, well, as I say in my book, there was a sort of showdown really in the late summer where the King said to him, look, if you insist on staying there, then I will be cutting off your living allowance, and you will be liable for all the costs of Royal Lodge and all your own expenses. And the Duke of York said, okay, called his bluff, and so the King has now cut off his brother's allowance. And as I also say in the book, Prince Andrew's claims, he says, I found the money to pay all the costs, I can finance my life independently, and as long as that money is legitimate, and we are told that it is, then he can carry on living there, but he's got to pick up all the bills for the security, for the maintenance, and for himself, and that's many millions of pounds a year. Now, how much longer he can do that from the funds he has, well, that's the big question. We don't know. He's a private individual. We've got no right to sort of look at his bank statements. The Crown Estate and the monarchy do have a duty to check that this money is above board. For now, it is. But how much longer can he keep plundering his savings to pay these very substantial bills? Let's see.
And Rebecca, is there a risk that Andrew, who insists that he's never done anything wrong, feels forced now to try and make his own money?
Yeah, and this is an issue for the palace moving forwards, because of course he's got no discernible income apart from investments and savings he might have had, and so as someone who is, as Robert says, a private individual, he gets no public money anymore. He gets no private money from the King anymore. He's got to make his own way. Could he? I mean, I don't think he'll follow his nephew down the route of television documentaries and biographies, although never say never. Who knows what we'll be discussing on this programme in 2 years' time. But I think the bigger worry for the palace is if he tries to pick up those contacts he made when he was working as a trade ambassador for this country, when there was a lot of scrutiny put on his business interests in places like Kazakhstan and Libya. Could he pick up those contacts again and start kind of becoming, I suppose, a bit of an international broker? That could be problematic for the royal family. Maybe that's something they thought about, and they think it's a calculated risk they can take.
Mm-hmm. And Richard, you've written in your newsletter that you think Charles should just leave Andrew alone.
Yes, I mean, I've been speaking to friends and associates of Andrew over the past couple of weeks, and their main reaction has been one of bemusement. They just don't understand why the King is so keen to kick his brother out of his family home that he's been in. It was always meant to be his forever home. Yes, he's received money from the King to support him, but the King has almost limitless money. There's for him, £1 million a year is not a problem. And Andrew has been a public servant, all his life, and he served with the army. So suddenly to be told, oh, you've got to find this vast sum of money, just seems very unreasonable. Certainly the friends of his think it's a very difficult situation for everyone, and one that's completely unnecessary, because all it does is draw attention to the royal finances at a time when they're starting to come under a lot of scrutiny under our new socialist government.
I think he'd still be there though if he hadn't blown up his career. I mean, he that's a house that's always belonged to someone who performs public duties on behalf of the nation. It always did when George VI lived there, when Queen Mother lived there, and Prince Andrew, to begin with, he was performing public duties, and therefore there was an obligation, if you like, by the state to look after that property, make sure it was secure. Now he's got no public life, no prospect of a public life. Then I think that does bring into question, well, what's he still doing in a place that is was a home for many years of a sovereign.
And Robert, do you think it's fair to say then that the issues around this property and various others is still sort of in the King's to-do tray?
Well, it is, although the King is very conscious that it's not entirely in his gift because it's a Crown Estate property, and the Crown Estate ultimately answers to the government. So the King can't evict him, and wouldn't want to anyway. I mean, it's a case of, if you, Andrew, think that you have the wherewithal to keep this property standing up, maintained, secure, then carry on. But if you don't, we don't want to see it fall into disrepair. We don't want to see the situation which may come quite soon, where the Royal Collection, which owns quite a lot of the treasures inside there, may say, well, we can't be confident that this place is safe anymore. They start taking the paintings and some of the furniture away. I mean, you could end up in a very awkward situation, and it could be resolved if the Duke of York took the offer that is there to move inside the cordon to Frogmore Cottage, and then there would be no shortage, I'm sure, of global VIPs who would happily take on, as Rebecca says, take on the lease.
Well, we'll have to see how this plays out. We have our weekly Unsung Royal Heroes coming up, featuring our old favourite, Princess Anne. But before that, there was a fascinating interview in the Mail on Sunday with Steve Davis, who was a former driver for the late Diana, Princess of Wales. Here he is speaking to Sarah Oliver.
It's an exceptional job and something proud to be a part of. Yeah, in the younger days when they went to their prep school in Notting Hill, they either went with mum or dad, and then in the afternoon there was a pick-up. Sometimes we went to a friend's for a play date, or there were parties, birthday parties where everybody was invited. So it was a day-to-day routine until they went to boarding school.
I also understand that you helped them kind of enjoy themselves when they were in kind of Kensington Palace, for example.
Yes, we played football occasionally, where the Queen's Flight helicopters would come in and land was on a football pitch behind Kensington Palace inside Hyde Park. The football pitch was used by the Royal Household Football Club. They would get out of the car, go into the helicopter, talk to the pilot and everything, and then they would obviously get back into the car as the helicopter was due to fly off with mum and dad. So after the helicopter had gone, because we were up there on this football field with quite a huge area of grass, we occasionally had some fun, and I could sit Harry or William on my lap and I would do the pedals, and then they would have some fun, with the steering wheel, and we'd do a few handbrake turns and stuff on the grass, which it was flat grass and it was very easy, but it was great fun. They loved that.
Obviously you were very intimate with the family. You were very you were up close with them, and you were driving Diana at one of the most vulnerable, extreme points of her life, and I know that you drove her on what's come to be known as revenge dress night. So how did that happen? That's
right. I'm aware of the revenge dress now. At the time, it wasn't that obvious to me. The dress was a little bit revealing at the time for what I thought was maybe just to visit some art. And I said to the princess then, if I wasn't working tonight, Mum, I'd take you out myself, which she thought was quite funny.
How did she respond to that?
She said, "Thank you very much, Steve." So, and we went on. I went on with my duties, and we drove down, and the rest is history. After the separation, she decided that she didn't really need protection the whole time. Mm-hmm. Maybe a couple of times a week I'd come in a little earlier because she wanted to go to the gym at Chelsea Harbour Club.
Yeah.
As a chauffeur, obviously my weapon is the car.
Yes.
Other than that, I could only visually protect her, If I saw something or I thought something was going to happen, I could have said something, but I wasn't allowed to carry firearms or anything as a civilian. I myself was doing reconnaissance to venues that we were going to be visiting the next day, where we would arrive, where we would stop, all this kind of thing, and that's how it went. And I do on occasion remember running over a few paparazzi toes and things, but all in a day's work. I'm glad I did it. I was very lucky to have done it. She'd be very proud of both William and Harry, you know, and maybe that would have been a different course for Harry if she'd still have been around as well. Who knows? Yeah, as I see the King and the Queen now on TV, I think I could have been there as the King's chauffeur now, or driving for William and Catherine and the family. Driving William as a small boy from the age of 5 or 6 he was when I started, to now driving him as the Prince of Wales would have been a pleasure and a duty, you know, so.
It's on the Daily Mail news channel, and we'll put a link to the written piece in the information below. Well, do you hear that? Yes, it's time to celebrate the unsung heroes of the royal family. Rebecca, I think you are nominating the Princess Royal. Tell us why.
Yeah, going back to our old favourite Princess Anne, which is where we started this whole segment. She was arriving for some engagements in Scotland. The weather was terrible. Her Cessna had to circle a few times, aborted landings, and yet she arrived unruffled, not a hair out of place, and conducted a whole day of engagements as if nothing had happened. So, well done, Princess Anne.
That's what she does. I mean, you know, I was interviewing a dyed-in-the-wool Republican who completely changed their mind because they were waiting for the princess to arrive at an event in Lincolnshire. The weather turned. She couldn't get in a helicopter. They thought it had been cancelled, but oh no, she got in a car and drove there for 4 hours because she didn't want to let people down. And she absolutely sticks to her guns. I just think she's a great trooper. And also during this year, when the King's been ill for a lot of it, and the Prince of Wales has obviously had other things on his plate, she's been the one who's been doing most of the investitures, and sometimes, you know, 2 in a day, and those are long sessions, and she just gets on with it.
My favourite Princess Anne moment was in accompanying her for a day of engagements in Surrey for her 70th birthday, and it was like playing wacky races. Like, she was packing so much in, and I was in a taxi like, come on, quicker, trying to catch up with her. And our last engagement of the day was at an equine college in Guildford, and she went to watch a horse post-mortem, and they'd cut off the horse's head, at which point I had my body in the room and my head outside retching, and all I could hear was going, oh good lord, it's the spleen. I just thought, you are so hardcore, you really are.
She has really stepped up. And Robert, I know you spent a year with Princess Anne. What have your been impressions of her?
Well, yes, we were making a film for her, covering her 70th birthday, and during the course of that year followed her all over the place. And I mean, she just, she's very no-nonsense, very tiny retinue, and absolute fascination with whatever it is that she's looking at. I always remember that during the COVID pandemic, and you know, everyone was sort of it was locked down, and but everyone was sort of paying, you know, as they should, you know, homage to the NHS and all the doctors and nurses. But she was keen to sort of celebrate the other people who were sort of keeping the place going. And I remember right in the middle of the COVID pandemic, she insisted on going to meet bin men and lorry drivers and refuse collection people in a depot in Cambridge, because she said it's very important. People have got to carry on picking up the rubbish during all this. You know, that's the sort of thing she does. She's often celebrating the sort of less exalted, less famous parts of society, but they're important nonetheless, and she's hugely popular for it.
She is celebrating her unsung heroes, just as she is ours today. And she made a little wry comment about the actress who played her in the series The Crown.
Yes, yeah. When we were watching her, she was sitting having for a sculpture set. She was making a sort of bust of her, and she was just reflecting. Someone asked her about The Crown, and she said, "No, I don't watch it, but I was fascinated to read that the actress who plays me, it takes several people and 2 hours to do her hair. It takes me 15 minutes, and I do it myself." And I just thought, there we go, that's her.
Well, Princess Anne, unsung hero today on Palace Confidential. And as mentioned, the day of recording is the King's 76th birthday. So to celebrate, here are some of our favourite pictures of the now monarch on his birthday or celebrating the big day over the years. There are some great ones in here. Once again, wishing His Majesty the King a very happy birthday. And up next on this channel, meanwhile, is the latest episode of Reading the Royals with our very own Richard Eden. And click here if you would like to watch that. There will also be more to come on Reading the Royals next week, so keep subscribed to the Daily Mail Royals for more updates. And a reminder that Robert Hardman's excellent updated biography of Charles III is out now. Just time to say thank you to Rebecca, Robert and Richard, and of course to you for watching. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.